Someone just saved our company $65 million, and I have no idea who they are. Helena Sterling's voice carried a mixture of bewilderment and barely contained fury as she stared at the pencil corrections scattered across financial reports that should have been pristine and final. The night shift at Sterling Global Investments belonged to Marcus Reid. While Manhattan's financial elite slept in their penthouses, he moved through the glass towers like a ghost, cleaning offices where million-dollar decisions were made by people who never acknowledged his existence. Marcus had perfected the art of invisibility over 3 years of emptying executive trash cans and wiping down conference room tables. At 39, he understood that being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when Tyler depended on him. Tonight felt different as Marcus entered the main conference room where Sterling's quarterly board presentation materials were spread across the mahogany table. Something made him pause as he reached for his cleaning supplies, numbers that caught his trained eye, figures that told a story their creators probably didn't realize they were telling. The irony wasn't lost on him. 7 years ago, Marcus Reid had been one of the most respected forensic accountants in New York, the kind of investigator who could unravel complex financial frauds with surgical precision. His Wharton MBA and CPA certification had opened doors throughout the industry, and his reputation for catching what others missed had made him invaluable. Then came the Meridian Capital case. 8 months of painstaking investigation had exposed a Ponzi scheme so sophisticated it had fooled federal regulators for years. When Marcus presented his findings to the FBI, the resulting collapse took down 3 major investment firms, cost thousands their life savings, and sent a sitting senator to federal prison. It had also destroyed Marcus's career. The financial industry was smaller than most people realized. Word traveled fast through its interconnected networks. Whistleblower. It can't be trusted. Too ethical for his own good. Within months of the Meridian scandal, Marcus couldn't get hired anywhere in finance. That was when Tyler was 6 and asking why Daddy couldn't find a new job. That was when medical bills from Keisha's cancer treatment kept arriving months after the funeral. That was when Marcus learned that doing the right thing was a luxury he could no longer afford. The night shift at Sterling Global had been a lifeline. Steady pay, health benefits, and the blessed anonymity of working while the financial world slept. For 3 years, Marcus had cleaned these offices and told himself he was building something stable for Tyler. But old habits died hard. Even while emptying trash cans, Marcus's trained eye automatically processed the financial documents he encountered. Most of the time, he forced himself to look away, to ignore the patterns his brain couldn't help but recognize. Tonight, standing where Sterling's future would be decided, Marcus couldn't look away. The European Portfolio Report showed billions in assets under management, diversified across dozens of funds. The summary looked professional, ready for board presentation. But in the third column, Marcus spotted what had to be a transposition error, $784.3 million, where it should have read $847. $3 million. A simple mistake. The kind that happened when analysts worked crushing hours fueled by caffeine and desperation. Except Marcus's forensic training had taught him that simple mistakes were rarely simple. Using his phone's calculator, Marcus began tracing the error through the interconnected web of calculations. What he found made his hands tremble. The transposition had cascaded through multiple calculations, creating a false impression of portfolio performance that was off by exactly $65.3 million. $65 million that existed on paper, but not in reality. Money that clients believed they had, but that had somehow evaporated into the mathematics of modern finance. Marcus stood in the empty conference room, his heart pounding as the implications crystallized. This wasn't just a typo. This was the kind of discrepancy that either indicated massive systemic failure or deliberate fraud. Either way, it destroyed companies and sent executives to federal prison. He thought of Tyler, sleeping peacefully in their queen's apartment, probably dreaming about the upcoming math competition, where he'd likely embarrass kids twice his age with his intuitive understanding of complex calculations. Tyler was brilliant in the way that both thrilled and terrified Marcus, a mind that saw patterns others missed, that found elegant solutions to impossible problems. Tyler deserved better than a father who kept destroying his own life for abstract principles. Marcus started to walk away, to leave the documents exactly as he'd found them. He was the night janitor, not the forensic accountant. His job was to empty trash and wipe surfaces, not to save pension funds from catastrophic losses. But as he reached the door, Marcus stopped. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, the day-shift cleaning lady who'd mentioned that her teacher's pension was managed by some big Manhattan firm she trusted. He thought about Williams, the security guard who showed pictures of his grandson and talked about the college fund he was building through his police pension. Money managed by firms like Sterling Global. Money that people trusted would be there when they needed it most. Marcus turned around and walked back to the conference table. Using a pencil from his cleaning supplies, he began making careful corrections in the margins. Nothing dramatic or attention-grabbing, just small notations that would help someone else catch the error before it became catastrophe. 784.3 became 847.3, with a small arrow and question mark. The portfolio allocation percentages were recalculated and noted. The risk assessment numbers were adjusted to reflect mathematical reality rather than false projections created by the cascade error. It took Marcus over 30 minutes to trace through all the implications and make the necessary corrections. When he finished, the documents told a different story, still profitable for Sterling Global, but with a much clearer picture of where their clients actually stood. Marcus gathered the papers, stacked them neatly in exactly the same order he'd found them, and completed his cleaning routine. Tomorrow morning, the analysts would arrive to find their work mysteriously corrected, errors highlighted in pencil, with neat explanations in margins they probably wouldn't notice. Maybe they'd catch the corrections and investigate. Maybe they'd ignore them entirely. Maybe they'd assume another team member had found the mistakes during a late review. What they wouldn't know was that their company had been saved by a man whose existence barely registered on their corporate consciousness, whose expertise they'd never recognize, whose name they'd never learn. As Marcus took the service elevator to the basement and clocked out, he felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and resignation that had defined his life since Meridian Capital. He'd done the right thing, quietly and without recognition. He'd potentially saved thousands of retirees from devastating losses, and he'd done it all while remaining completely invisible. What Marcus couldn't anticipate was that Helena Sterling made a habit of arriving early to review important presentations, or that she had the kind of obsessive attention to detail that would make her notice pencil corrections on documents that were supposed to be final. And what he definitely couldn't predict was that Helena Sterling had been suspecting exactly this kind of systematic problem in her company, but hadn't been able to prove it until someone left her a trail of corrections that led straight to the heart of what was wrong with Sterling Global Investments. As Marcus quietly checked on Tyler, who was sleeping with a mathematics textbook beside him, the CEO of Sterling Global was studying pencil marks that would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Helena Sterling discovered the corrections during her early morning review of the quarterly presentation materials. The pencil marks scattered across documents that should have been pristine made her question everything she thought she knew about her own company. Someone had caught errors her entire analytical team had missed. Not just simple mistakes, but a complex web of miscalculations that revealed either systematic incompetence or something far worse. Helena studied each correction with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. The handwriting was neat and methodical, belonging to someone who understood not just basic mathematics, but the intricate relationships of institutional portfolio management. She picked up her phone and called David Morrison, her chief financial officer. "David, I need you in my office immediately." "Helena, it's barely dawn. Whatever crisis you think..." "Now, David, and bring the overnight building access logs." David Morrison arrived looking slightly less polished than usual, but still projecting the confidence that came with his Harvard MBA and extensive Wall Street connections. At 56, he represented everything that was supposed to be right about Sterling Global. "What's so urgent?" David asked, settling into his usual chair. Helena slid the corrected documents across her desk without a word. David's expression shifted as he reviewed the papers, his confident demeanor giving way to something that looked like panic before quickly reassembling into professional concern. "I'm not sure what I'm looking at," David said carefully. "Someone caught a $65 million error in our European portfolio calculations," Helena replied, her voice carrying controlled fury. "An error that you and your entire team missed despite multiple reviews." David's face had gone pale. "Helena, these appear to be minor computational adjustments. $65 million is not a minor adjustment, David." Helena leaned forward. "This kind of discrepancy suggests either massive failure in our processes or deliberate manipulation." "Which is it?" Before David could respond, Helena's assistant appeared in the doorway. "Miss Sterling, security has the overnight access logs you requested." Building Security Chief Roberts entered with records showing every keycard swipe and door access in the tower. "Ma'am, the overnight logs show only cleaning crew access to the executive floors. The conference room was accessed by one person, Marcus Reid, night maintenance staff. He was in that room for over 30 minutes. Helena studied the security footage on Roberts's tablet, watching a tall figure in grey uniform methodically work through the papers. Even in grainy video, she could see the careful, deliberate way he examined each document. "Bring him in," Helena said. "Ma'am, Marcus Reid. I want to speak with him immediately. He's not scheduled until tonight. Call him. Tell him it's urgent." Less than an hour later, Marcus Reid stood in Helena Sterling's office, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, looking like a man who'd been awakened by an unexpected summons. He was taller than she'd expected, with an understated dignity that suggested someone comfortable with himself, despite circumstances that would rattle most people. Helena studied him, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes and the way he carried himself, alert but not defensive, ready for whatever was coming. "Mr. Reid," she began, "last night you accessed confidential financial documents in our conference room. You made corrections to those documents. I want to know why." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving from Helena to David Morrison, who was watching with barely concealed hostility. "I noticed mathematical errors," Marcus said simply, "inconsistencies that could have caused significant problems." David stood up abruptly. "This is absurd, Helena. Mr. Reid is maintenance staff. What possible understanding could he have of complex portfolio analysis?" Marcus turned to look at David directly, and Helena caught something in his expression, not anger, but the weary patience of someone whose intelligence had been repeatedly underestimated. "I have a master's degree in accounting from Wharton," Marcus said quietly, 7 years of experience as a forensic accountant specializing in fraud detection. "The error you missed was a transposition that cascaded through multiple calculations, creating a false impression that overstated client assets by $65 million. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face flushed while Helena leaned forward with predatory focus. "If you have those qualifications," Helena said carefully, "why are you working maintenance?" "Because 7 years ago I exposed the Meridian Capital Ponzi scheme," Marcus replied. After that investigation sent a senator to prison and collapsed 3 investment firms, I discovered that certain types of integrity make you unemployable in this industry. Helena's breath caught. She remembered the Meridian scandal, front-page news for weeks, one of the largest fraud cases in financial history. "You're the forensic accountant who brought down Senator Richardson's network," she said. "I'm the accountant who did his job," Marcus corrected. "The fact that it destroyed my career was an unintended consequence." David stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Helena, you can't seriously consider the word of a disgraced whistleblower over your own CFO. The man was blacklisted for a reason." "The man was blacklisted for doing exactly what I'd want any employee to do, catching fraud before it destroyed innocent people's lives," Helena said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. She turned back to Marcus. "These corrections you made, you did them voluntarily. No one asked you to review those documents." "No one asked me to do anything except clean the conference room," Marcus replied. "But I couldn't walk away from numbers that told me people were about to lose their life savings because of preventable errors." Helena picked up the documents, studying the neat pencil corrections again. "How long would it take you to conduct a comprehensive audit of our European portfolio?" David stepped forward urgently. "Helena, you can't be serious. This man has no current certifications, no security clearance." "How long?" Helena repeated, ignoring David completely. Marcus considered the question. "With full access to underlying data. 2 weeks for preliminary assessment, 4 weeks for comprehensive forensic audit. And if you found irregularities similar to what you caught last night, then you'd know exactly where you stand before presenting to the board, instead of finding out afterward when it's too late to fix anything." Helena was quiet for a long moment, weighing options with the rapid calculation that had made her one of the youngest CEOs on Wall Street. She thought about the pension fund contract, about the board presentation, about the $65 million that could have vanished without anyone noticing. Then she thought about Marcus Reid, standing in her office having just saved her company from potential catastrophe while asking for nothing in return. "Mr. Reid," she said finally, "I want to offer you a consulting position to conduct the audit we just discussed. You'll work directly with me, with full access to whatever data you need." The room erupted. David Morrison's protests were immediate and vehement, while Marcus looked genuinely shocked. "Helena, this is insane," David said. "You can't just hire a janitor as a consultant because he caught some computational errors. The board will thank me when we avoid the kind of scandal that destroys companies," Helena cut him off. "Mr. Reid, do you accept?" Marcus thought about Tyler, probably getting ready for school, wondering why his father had been called away so early. He thought about the promise he'd made to keep their lives stable and safe. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and her teacher's pension, about Williams and his grandson's college fund, about all the people who trusted companies like Sterling Global to protect their futures. "I accept," he said quietly. "Excellent. We'll handle the paperwork and security clearances. You can start Monday." Helena stood, effectively ending the meeting. "David, I'll need you to provide Mr. Reid with full access to the European portfolio data." David Morrison's face was a mask of barely controlled rage as he left, already calculating how to undermine this unprecedented decision. Marcus remained behind, still processing what had happened. "Miss Sterling," he said, "you should know this is going to create problems. People don't like it when the natural order gets disrupted." "Mr. Reid," Helena replied, "I didn't build this company by avoiding problems. I built it by solving them before they solved me." As Marcus left to begin a new chapter of his life, Helena Sterling stood at her window looking out at Manhattan's financial district. She'd just made a decision that would either vindicate her reputation for bold leadership or destroy everything she'd built. But as she thought about the $65 million that Marcus had quietly saved, she realized she'd rather bet on competence than credentials. The real test was just beginning. The news of Marcus Reid's hiring spread through Sterling Global like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest. By noon on Monday, every employee from junior analysts to senior partners knew that Helena Sterling had promoted a janitor to financial consultant, and the reactions ranged from bewilderment to outright hostility. Marcus sat in his new office, a modest space on the 38th floor with a view of the city and a computer terminal that gave him access to financial data worth billions. The contrast with his cleaning cart felt surreal, but the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and audit trails helped ground him in reality. What didn't feel comfortable were the stairs. Walking through the halls of Sterling Global, Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking his movement. Conversations stopped when he approached the elevator. Whispers followed him into the break room. The message was clear: he didn't belong here, and his presence was an affront to the natural order. "Dad, why are the kids at school asking if you're famous?" Tyler had asked that morning over breakfast, his 11-year-old face scrunched with confusion. "Jimmy Chen says his mom saw something on the financial news about a janitor getting promoted." Marcus had tried to explain, without revealing how precarious their new situation really was. Tyler was brilliant, but still a child, and children deserved to feel secure even when their parents were walking tightropes over professional disasters. "Sometimes grown-ups have to take chances to make things better," Marcus had said, helping Tyler pack his backpack. "It might get complicated for a while, but we'll figure it out together." Now, sitting in his new office, Marcus wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The preliminary audit findings spread across his desk painted a picture that was far worse than a simple transposition error. The deeper he dug into Sterling Global's European portfolio, the more irregularities he found, discrepancies that suggested either systematic incompetence or deliberate fraud. A knock on his door interrupted his analysis. Jennifer Walsh, one of the senior analysts from David Morrison's team, stood in the doorway with an expression that managed to be both polite and venomous. "Mr. Reid," she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "I wanted to personally welcome you to the analytical team." Jennifer was everything Marcus wasn't: Harvard MBA, family connections throughout the industry, the kind of pedigree that opened doors and commanded respect. She was also, according to the audit trail Marcus was following, responsible for several of the calculation errors he'd been hired to investigate. "Thank you," Marcus replied simply. "I have to say, it's refreshing to see Helena taking such an unconventional approach to staffing." Jennifer stepped into the office, her smile sharp as a blade. "I'm sure you'll find the work here quite different from your previous experience." The emphasis on previous experience carried unmistakable contempt. Marcus had dealt with this kind of professional sabotage before: the subtle undermining, the casual dismissal, the death by 1,000 cuts that could destroy careers without leaving fingerprints. "I'm finding the work very familiar, actually," Marcus said. "Numbers don't lie, regardless of who's analyzing them." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Well, if you need any help understanding our methodologies, please don't hesitate to ask. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." After she left, Marcus returned to his audit with renewed focus. The irregularities he'd found weren't random errors. They followed a pattern that suggested deliberate manipulation. Someone was systematically overstating portfolio performance, and the someone appeared to be David Morrison himself. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler's school. "Please call regarding an incident involving Tyler Reid." The drive to Tyler's school felt like the longest 20 minutes of Marcus's life. He found his son sitting in the principal's office with a split lip and grass stains on his uniform, looking smaller than his 11 years. "What happened?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside Tyler's chair. "Some 8th graders were saying stuff about you," Tyler said quietly. about how you're trying to pretend you're smart enough to work with rich people. They said you're probably going to get fired and we'll end up homeless. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, not at the children, who were only repeating what they'd heard at home, but at the adults who would poison kids with their prejudices. "What did you do?" Marcus asked. "I told them you're the smartest person I know, and that you're going to help people by catching the bad guys who steal money." Tyler looked up at his father with eyes that held too much understanding for someone his age. "Then Tommy Morrison called you a word I'm not supposed to say, so I hit him." Morrison, David Morrison's son, attended the same school as Tyler. The message was clear. The professional warfare had become personal. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, was sympathetic but firm. "Tyler will need to serve a 3-day suspension for fighting. However, given the circumstances and the other boys' behavior, it won't go on his permanent record." During the drive home, Tyler was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke up. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" The simple question carried the weight of every fear Marcus had about exposing his son to the consequences of his own choices. Tyler had already lost his mother. Now his father's decision to step out of the shadows was making him a target. "We're going to be fine," Marcus said, hoping it was true. "But it might get harder before it gets easier." That evening, Marcus worked late in his home office while Tyler did homework at the kitchen table. The audit findings were damning. David Morrison had been systematically inflating portfolio returns for over 2 years, creating the illusion of performance that didn't exist. The $65 million error Marcus had caught was just the tip of an iceberg that could sink Sterling Global entirely. His secure phone rang. Helena Sterling's voice was tense. "Marcus, we have a problem. David's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's claiming that your audit findings are the result of a personal vendetta and that you're manufacturing evidence to cover your own incompetence." Marcus felt a chill. David was moving faster than expected, trying to eliminate the threat before the investigation could be completed. "Can you delay the meeting?" Marcus asked. "Not without concrete proof of what you found. The board is already skeptical about my decision to hire you. If David can frame this as my poor judgment enabling a disgraced accountant's revenge fantasy," she didn't need to finish. Marcus understood. His credibility was the foundation of the entire investigation. If David could destroy that, the fraud would remain hidden, and Marcus would be discredited permanently. "I need 48 hours to compile everything into a presentation that's bulletproof," Marcus said. "You have 18 hours, Helena replied. "The meeting is at 9 a.m. After hanging up, Marcus looked at Tyler, who had stopped pretending to do homework and was watching his father with concern. "Dad, you look scared." Marcus considered lying, protecting his son from the adult world of corporate warfare and professional destruction. But Tyler was too smart and too perceptive to be fooled by false reassurances. "I am scared," Marcus admitted. "Tomorrow, I have to prove that some very powerful people have been lying about very important things. If I can't prove it, we might have to start over somewhere else." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness that made him seem older than his years. "Will you let me help?" Tyler asked. "Buddy, this is complicated adult stuff." "Dad, I'm really good at math," Tyler interrupted. "And you always say that numbers don't lie. Maybe I can see something you missed." Looking at his son, brilliant, brave, and utterly trusting in his father's ability to solve impossible problems, Marcus made a decision that would either save their future or destroy it completely. "Okay," he said. "Let's catch some bad guys." As father and son spread financial documents across the kitchen table, beginning an all-night session that would determine their fate, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside taking photographs with a telephoto lens. David Morrison's counterattack had already begun. The Sterling Global boardroom had never felt more like a gladiatorial arena. Marcus sat at one end of the massive mahogany table, his presentation materials spread before him like battle plans, while David Morrison commanded the other end with the confident air of someone who believed he'd already won. Between them sat 12 of Manhattan's most powerful executives, their faces ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Helena Sterling occupied her position at the head of the table, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her pen like a weapon. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice carrying the polished authority of decades in corporate boardrooms, "we're here because our CEO has made a decision that threatens the very foundation of our company's credibility." David gestured toward Marcus with barely concealed contempt. "Ms. Sterling has hired a disgraced former accountant, a man who was blacklisted from this industry for good reason, and given him access to our most sensitive financial data. The so-called audit findings he's prepared are nothing more than an elaborate revenge fantasy against an industry that rightfully rejected him." Board member Catherine Westbrook leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, these are serious accusations. What evidence do you have?" David smiled, producing a thick folder. "Mr. Reid's personnel file makes fascinating reading. Court-mandated anger management after his dismissal from Meridian Capital. Financial difficulties that led to bankruptcy proceedings. A pattern of erratic behavior that culminated in his taking a janitorial position under false pretenses." Marcus felt the familiar weight of his past being weaponized against him. Every personal failure, every moment of weakness, twisted into evidence of professional incompetence. "Furthermore," David continued, "our internal investigation has revealed that Mr. Reid has been sharing confidential company information with outside parties. We have photographic evidence of him removing documents from company premises." The photographs appeared on the presentation screen, Marcus leaving his apartment building with Tyler, both of them carrying folders and papers. David had been watching them, turning their late-night collaboration into evidence of corporate espionage. "That's my son helping me with homework," Marcus said quietly, but his voice was lost in the murmur of concern that rippled around the table. Helena's face had gone pale. The board was turning against her, and Marcus could see her calculating the political cost of continuing to support him. "Mr. Reid," Board Chairman Harold Pierce said gravely, "these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have a response?" Marcus stood slowly, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. This was the moment Tyler had helped him prepare for during their all-night session, when an 11-year-old's mathematical intuition had found the pattern that adult sophistication had missed. "Mr. Morrison is correct about one thing," Marcus began. "I was blacklisted from this industry. I was blacklisted because I exposed a Ponzi scheme that cost investors $2 billion, but would have cost them $20 billion if I'd stayed silent." He activated his own presentation, and the screen filled with financial data. "Mr. Morrison says my findings are revenge fantasy. Let me show you what revenge looks like when it's built on mathematics." The first slide showed the $65 million error Marcus had originally caught. This transposition error wasn't random. It followed a pattern that's been repeated quarterly for over 2 years. The next slide revealed the pattern Tyler had identified, a systematic manipulation of portfolio returns that inflated performance by exactly 3% each quarter. Not enough to trigger automatic audit flags, but enough to generate millions in false management fees. "The genius of this scheme," Marcus continued, "is that it doesn't steal money directly. It steals performance. Clients think their investments are growing faster than they actually are, so they don't withdraw funds. Meanwhile, Sterling Global collects management fees based on inflated asset values." Board member James Morrison, no relation to David, despite the name, leaned forward with interest. "How much money are we talking about?" "Over 2 years, approximately $400 million in fraudulent fees." The room erupted. David Morrison's face had gone white, but he rallied quickly. "This is exactly the kind of wild conspiracy theory I warned you about," David said. "Mr. Reid is manufacturing patterns that don't exist, using his son as an unpaid assistant, in violation of every confidentiality protocol we have." Marcus felt the moment slipping away. David was right about the protocols, and the board was beginning to side with institutional authority over inconvenient truth. Then Helena Sterling stood up. "David," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision, "there's something I haven't told the board about why I hired Mr. Reid." She activated her own presentation, and the screen filled with internal emails and financial records. "For the past 6 months, I've been conducting my own investigation into irregularities in our European portfolio. I suspected systematic manipulation, but couldn't prove it." The emails showed Helena's growing suspicions, her requests for additional documentation that David had consistently deflected or delayed. "When Mr. Reid found that $65 million error," Helena continued, "he gave me the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for months. His findings don't contradict our internal controls. They explain why those controls have been failing." She turned to face David directly. "You've been very careful, David, but you made one mistake. You assumed that I was too trusting to notice the pattern." David Morrison's composure finally cracked. "This is a setup," he snarled. "You planned this from the beginning, using this nobody as your stalking horse." "I planned nothing," Helena replied calmly. "I simply recognized competence when I saw it, regardless of what uniform it was wearing." Board member Westbrook was studying the financial data on her tablet. "These numbers are compelling, but how do we verify their accuracy?" "We don't have to," said a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Tyler Reid standing in the doorway, looking impossibly young in his school uniform, but carrying himself with the confidence of someone who understood numbers better than most adults. "Tyler," Marcus said, alarmed, "what are you doing here?" "Mrs. Henderson said I could come if I brought my math homework," Tyler replied seriously. "And this is my math homework." He walked to the presentation screen with the fearless directness of childhood, pulling out a folder of handwritten calculations. "Dad showed me these numbers last night, and I found something everybody missed." Tyler's voice was clear and confident. "Mr. Morrison didn't just steal money. He stole it in a pattern that matches the Fibonacci sequence." The adults in the room stared at the 11-year-old, who had just accused a senior executive of mathematical fraud. "Every quarter, the manipulation increased by exactly the amount predicted by Fibonacci numbers," Tyler continued, his handwriting appearing on the screen as Helena's assistant connected his papers to the projection system. "It's actually really elegant. He was trying to make the theft look natural, like market fluctuations." David Morrison's face had gone from white to red. "This is insane. You're taking financial advice from a child. I'm taking mathematical analysis from someone who understands patterns," Helena corrected, "and Tyler's analysis proves that your scheme wasn't random error. It was systematic theft." The board voted unanimously to suspend David Morrison pending a full federal investigation. As security escorted him from the building, David stopped beside Marcus's chair. "You think you've won," David whispered, "but you have no idea what you've started. There are people in this industry who won't forget what you've done." "Good," Marcus replied quietly. "I'm counting on it." After the boardroom cleared, Marcus found himself alone with Helena and Tyler, who was carefully organizing his homework papers with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. "Tyler," Helena said, kneeling to his eye level, "that was remarkable work. Have you ever considered a career in forensic accounting?" Tyler looked at his father, then back at Helena. "Is that what Dad does? Catch bad guys with math?" "Among other things," Helena smiled. "Your father just saved thousands of people from losing their retirement savings." "Udedim," As they prepared to leave the building, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years, the satisfaction of using his skills to protect innocent people without having to sacrifice his family's future in the process. "Dad," Tyler said as they walked toward the elevator, "I think I want to be like you when I grow up." "Smart and handsome?" Marcus asked, ruffling his son's hair. "Brave," Tyler replied seriously, "and good at math." Looking at Helena Sterling, who had risked her own career to support the right choice rather than the easy one, Marcus realized that Tyler wasn't the only one who had learned something about courage today. Some battles, he was beginning to understand, were worth fighting precisely because the stakes were so high. The federal investigation into David Morrison's financial manipulation scheme moved with the methodical precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. FBI agents descended on Sterling Global like a swarm of accountants with badges, seizing servers, freezing accounts, and turning the normally pristine offices into a maze of evidence boxes and interview rooms. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, no longer the invisible janitor, but a key witness whose testimony would determine whether $400 million in stolen fees would be recovered for the pension funds and retirees who had been systematically defrauded. The transformation wasn't easy. 3 weeks after David's arrest, Marcus still felt like an imposter, walking through the executive floors in his new suits, still caught himself looking for cleaning supplies when he entered conference rooms. But Tyler's proud smile when he visited the office and Helena's unwavering support helped him navigate the strange new reality of being both respected and resented. The resentment was real and palpable. While some Sterling Global employees had embraced the changes, younger analysts who appreciated merit over pedigree, support staff who felt seen for the first time, others made their displeasure clear through cold shoulders and whispered conversations that stopped when Marcus approached. "Dad, why do some people act like you did something wrong?" Tyler asked one evening as they worked together on his actual math homework. "You caught the bad guy." "Isn't that good? It's complicated, buddy," Marcus replied, helping Tyler with a calculus problem that would have challenged most high school students. "Sometimes, when you change the rules, people who benefited from the old rules get upset." "That's stupid," Tyler declared, with the moral clarity that only children possessed. "Rules should be fair for everyone." Marcus wished the adult world operated with Tyler's simple logic. The complexity became clear during the federal hearing where Marcus testified about his findings. The courtroom was packed with journalists, Sterling Global employees, and representatives from the pension funds whose money had been stolen. David Morrison sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, flanked by lawyers who specialized in making white-collar criminals look like misunderstood businessmen. "Mr. Reid," David's lead attorney began during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were terminated from your previous position for insubordination and erratic behavior?" "I was terminated for exposing financial fraud," Marcus replied calmly. "The FBI investigation that followed validated every finding in my report. But you were nevertheless blacklisted from the financial industry, forcing you to take employment as a janitor. That must have created significant resentment toward the industry that rejected you." Marcus could feel the attorney trying to paint him as a vengeful outsider manufacturing evidence to settle personal scores. It was a familiar attack, the same strategy that had been used against him 7 years earlier. "My resentment," Marcus said, "is toward people who steal money from teachers and firefighters and think they won't get caught because they wear expensive suits." The prosecutor's case was solid, built on the mathematical analysis that Marcus and Tyler had developed and supported by the digital evidence Helena had helped uncover. But David Morrison's defense team wasn't going quietly. During Helena's testimony, David's attorneys portrayed her as an inexperienced CEO who had been manipulated by a disgraced accountant seeking revenge against his former industry. They suggested that the entire investigation was a publicity stunt designed to cover up Helena's own management failures. Ms. Sterling, the defense attorney pressed, isn't it true that you hired Mr. Reid not because of his qualifications, but because you needed a scapegoat for the financial irregularities that occurred under your leadership? Helena's response was ice-cold fury wrapped in corporate professionalism. I hired Mr. Reid because he demonstrated competence that my existing staff had failed to show. If protecting my company's clients from fraud makes me an inexperienced CEO, then I'll wear that label proudly. The turning point came when Tyler took the stand. The sight of an 11-year-old testifying in a federal fraud case drew gasps from the gallery, but Tyler approached the witness stand with the same calm confidence he brought to math competitions. He wore his school uniform and carried a folder of handwritten calculations, looking impossibly young but utterly unintimidated. Tyler, the prosecutor began gently, can you explain how you helped your father analyze the financial data? Dad showed me the numbers, and I noticed they followed a pattern, Tyler said, his voice clear and steady. Mr. Morrison was stealing money using Fibonacci sequences because he thought it would look natural. The defense attorney's objection was immediate. Your Honor, this child cannot possibly understand complex financial fraud. I understand math, Tyler replied before the judge could respond. And math doesn't lie. Tyler's explanation of the Fibonacci pattern was simple, elegant, and devastating. Using visual aids prepared by the prosecution, he showed how David's theft had followed mathematical principles that were too precise to be coincidental. It's actually pretty smart, Tyler admitted, except that once you see the pattern, it's obvious. It's like hiding a secret message in plain sight, but forgetting that some people know how to read secret messages. David Morrison's face had gone ashen as his 11-year-old nemesis dismantled his defense with elementary mathematical principles. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. David Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the defrauded pension funds. As they left the courthouse, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Agent Sarah Martinez, who had led the FBI investigation, smiled at him. Mr. Reid, I wanted you to know that your work on this case has been exceptional. The Bureau would be very interested in discussing consulting opportunities with you. Marcus looked at Tyler, who was chattering excitedly about the mathematical testimony he'd just given, then at Helena, who was fielding questions from reporters about the corporate culture changes she planned to implement at Sterling Global. Agent Martinez, Marcus replied, I think I've found where I belong. 6 months later, the industry trade publications were calling it the Sterling Global Revolution, a new model of corporate governance that prioritized competence over credentials and transparency over tradition. Helena had been featured on the cover of Forbes as the CEO who changed everything, while Marcus's story had inspired congressional hearings on whistleblower protection and corporate accountability. But the real revolution was quieter and more personal. Marcus stood in his new office. He'd been promoted to Chief Risk Officer after the federal investigation concluded, watching Tyler work through calculus problems at the conference table they'd converted into homework space. The kid who'd once helped catch a $400 million fraud was now helping other employees' children with their math homework, creating an informal tutoring program that had become one of Sterling Global's most popular benefits. Helena knocked on the open door. Ready for the quarterly presentation? It had become their tradition. Marcus would present the risk assessment findings to the board, followed by questions from Tyler, who attended every meeting as an unofficial mathematical consultant. The board had initially been skeptical of including a child in corporate proceedings, but Tyler's insights had proven so valuable that several other companies had started their own youth advisory programs. Tyler, Are you coming? Helena asked. Almost done, Tyler replied, finishing an equation with the focused intensity he'd inherited from his father. I want to double-check the correlation analysis Dad showed me. As they walked toward the boardroom, Helena touched Marcus's arm. Any regrets about leaving the cleaning crew? Marcus thought about the question seriously. The past year had brought challenges he couldn't have imagined. Death threats from David Morrison's associates, congressional testimony, interview requests from business schools wanting to study the Sterling global model. But it had also brought something he'd thought was lost forever, the ability to use his skills to protect people without sacrificing his family's future. Ask me again in 20 years, Marcus replied. When Tyler's old enough to take over as chief mathematical officer. Is that a real position? Helena asked. It will be by the time he graduates college, Marcus said, watching his son organize his homework with the methodical precision of someone who understood that details mattered. As they entered the boardroom where everything had started, Marcus caught his reflection in the polished mahogany table. He no longer saw a disgraced accountant or an invisible janitor. He saw a father who had taught his son that doing the right thing was worth any risk, and a man who had learned that sometimes the most important revolutions began with someone quietly correcting a mistake that everyone else had missed. The presentation went smoothly. The board asked intelligent questions, and Tyler caught an error in the quarterly projections that would have cost Sterling Global's clients $2 million. Just another day at the office. 2 years after David Morrison's conviction, Marcus Reid stood in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, accepting the Financial Industry Ethics Award while Tyler sat at the head table, beaming with pride and wearing his first real tuxedo. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Sterling Global had become the industry model for corporate accountability, with other firms sending executives to study their risk management protocols and employee advancement policies. Marcus's story had inspired legislation protecting financial whistleblowers, and business schools now taught case studies about the Sterling Revolution. But the most meaningful changes were personal. Dad, they're taking pictures of us again, Tyler whispered as photographers captured the moment Marcus shook hands with the Treasury Secretary. At 13, Tyler had grown 3 inches and developed the quiet confidence that came from having his mathematical insights regularly validated by adults who ran billion-dollar companies. He'd also maintained the moral clarity that had made him willing to testify against David Morrison, recently writing a school essay about why math is more important than money, because math tells the truth. You're going to have to get used to it, Helena said, appearing beside them in an elegant navy gown that complemented her new role as the industry's most sought-after speaker on corporate governance. The 3 of us have become something of a symbol. The 3 of us. Marcus still marveled at how naturally that phrase had evolved over the past 2 years. What had started as a professional relationship between CEO and consultant had deepened into something that felt like family, not the instant, movie-perfect kind, but the slow-building trust that came from weathering storms together. Helena had stood by Marcus through the federal investigation, the media scrutiny, and the professional ostracism from traditionalists who resented his rise. Marcus had supported Helena through board challenges, shareholder disputes, and the exhausting process of rebuilding Sterling Global's culture from the ground up. And Tyler had somehow become the bridge between their 2 worlds, equally comfortable discussing portfolio theory with Helena and helping Marcus debug risk assessment algorithms. Ms. Sterling, a reporter approached with a microphone, there are rumors that you and Mr. Reid are planning to expand the Sterling Global model to other industries. Can you comment? Helena smiled with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to navigate media attention. Mr. Reid and I are always looking for ways to promote accountability and transparency in business. But tonight, we're just celebrating the progress we've already made. The progress was real and measurable. Sterling Global had recovered the full $400 million stolen by David Morrison, returning the money to pension funds and retirement accounts. The company's client base had grown by 60% as institutional investors sought firms with proven ethical track records. Most importantly, the corporate culture had shifted from credential-based hierarchy to merit-based collaboration. "Dad," Tyler said as they moved toward their table, "there's something I want to ask you about." Marcus had learned to pay attention when Tyler used that particular tone. It usually meant his son had been thinking about something complex and had reached a conclusion that adults might find uncomfortable. "What's on your mind, buddy? Why haven't you and Helena gotten married yet?" The question stopped Marcus mid-step. Around them, the ballroom continued its elegant dance of networking and celebration, but Marcus felt like he'd been frozen in place by his 13-year-old son's directness. "Tyler, that's complicated." "No, it's not," Tyler interrupted, with the mathematical precision he applied to everything. "You love each other. You work together perfectly. You both care about me. Helena makes you happy in a way you haven't been since Mum died. The variables all point to the same conclusion." Helena had overheard the conversation and was trying not to laugh. "Tyler, relationships aren't mathematical equations." "Why not?" Tyler asked seriously. "Everything else important can be analyzed mathematically. Love is just another form of optimization problem, maximizing happiness while minimizing risk." Marcus looked at Helena, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her expression. They'd been dancing around the question for months, both afraid to disrupt the delicate balance they'd achieved. The professional partnership worked perfectly, Tyler was thriving, and the media had cast them as the ideal example of modern corporate leadership. But underneath the professional success, something deeper had been growing. Quiet moments in the office after long days, shared glances during board meetings, the easy domestic comfort of the evenings when Helena joined them for dinner and homework help. "Tyler," Marcus said carefully, "Helena and I haven't talked about marriage because you're both overthinking it," Tyler declared. "Helena, do you want to marry Dad?" Helena's composed executive facade cracked slightly. "Tyler, that's not really yes or no." Tyler pressed with the relentless logic that made him formidable at math competitions. "Yes," Helena said quietly, her eyes meeting Marcus's. "I do." "Dad, do you want to marry Helena?" Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the ballroom full of financial industry leaders, the photographers still capturing their conversation, the risk of making their private feelings public. Then he looked at Tyler's expectant face and Helena's nervous smile and realized that some equations were simple after all. "Yes," he said. "I do." Tyler nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I already talked to Mrs. Henderson about using the school chapel for the ceremony. She says it's available next month." The laughter that followed broke the tension, and Marcus found himself pulling both Tyler and Helena into a hug that felt like the solution to a problem he hadn't known he was solving. 8 months later, they were married in Tyler's school chapel with a guest list that ranged from FBI agents to Sterling Global board members to Mrs. Rodriguez from the cleaning crew, who cried through the entire ceremony and told everyone within earshot that she'd known Marcus was special from the beginning. Tyler served as best man, delivering a speech that used statistical analysis to prove why his father and stepmother were mathematically perfect for each other, which received a standing ovation from guests who understood maybe half of his calculations but all of his affection. Helena's vows included a promise to always value competence over credentials and integrity over convention, while Marcus promised to never stop fighting for people who need someone to notice what others choose to ignore. During the reception, as Tyler danced with Mrs. Rodriguez and Helena networked with board members who'd become genuine friends, Marcus stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The journey from invisible janitor to industry leader had been surreal, but the most profound change was simpler. He was no longer afraid, Not of being seen, not of standing up for what was right, not of building a life that could be threatened by people with more power than principles. Helena found him on the terrace, looking out at the city lights of Manhattan. "Second thoughts?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "Just thinking about how different everything is," Marcus replied. 2 years ago, I was emptying your trash cans. Now I'm married to the CEO, and Tyler's planning to study economics at MIT so he can revolutionize corporate accountability through advanced mathematical modeling. Do you miss the simplicity? Marcus considered the question seriously. The quiet anonymity of the night shift had been peaceful in its way, free from the scrutiny and responsibility that came with visibility. But as Tyler appeared in the doorway, now 14, and discussing market theory with a federal judge like it was perfectly normal, Marcus realized that simplicity was overrated. "No," he said, taking Helena's hand. "I don't miss being invisible." Inside the reception, the band was playing something slow and romantic. Helena smiled and led him back toward the music, toward Tyler and their extended family of colleagues and friends who'd learned that the most important qualifications couldn't be measured by degrees or pedigree. As they danced, Marcus caught sight of their reflection in the ballroom's mirrors, no longer the janitor and the CEO, but partners in every sense of the word, bound together by shared values, and a 13-year-old mathematician who'd somehow known before either of them that love, like everything else important, could be solved if you were willing to do the work. The music swirled around them, and Marcus smiled at the elegant equation they'd become. 2 adults who'd learned to trust each other, 1 brilliant child who'd taught them both about courage, and a future full of problems worth solving together. Some calculations he'd discovered were worth a lifetime of verification. This story reminds us that excellence recognizes no boundaries of position or circumstance, and that the most important qualifications often have nothing to do with degrees or pedigree. In a world that frequently judges people by their uniforms rather than their abilities, Marcus Reid's journey shows us that competence and integrity can overcome any institutional prejudice. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources: a night janitor who notices what executives miss, a child who sees mathematical patterns that adults overlook, or a CEO brave enough to value substance over status. True leadership means recognizing talent wherever it appears and having the courage to act on that recognition, even when it challenges conventional wisdom. The next time you encounter someone whose potential has been overlooked or underestimated, remember that extraordinary solutions often come from ordinary people who refuse to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be. What hidden competencies are you carrying? What calculations are you making that others refuse to see? Like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of persistence, the importance of integrity, and the truth that merit will always matter more than status.